We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth comic book project, now available to support on Kickstarter. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Back this project and learn more by going to percivalconstantine.com/paragons. Also, Perry, a multiple-time guest on Digging for Kryptonite, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about comic book-inspired films. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts. The Adventures of Superman When He Was a Boy. For decades, Clark Kent's history as Superboy, both in Smallville and the future with the Legion of Super-Heroes, was a cornerstone of the Superman mythology. Despite being erased from comics continuity twice, the concept of Clark as Superboy has endured in various ways across time and media. It also represents the largest unexplored piece of my Superman fandom. Until now. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This week, we are examining Silver Age Superboy in both comics and animation across 3 segments. First up, joining me to discuss the 1960s Filmation Superboy cartoons is the editor-in-chief of 13thdimension.com, Dan Greenfield. Welcome.
Hey, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. You're here in studio.
Yes.
And before we talk about the Superboy animated shorts specifically, let's just talk about Filmation, because you are the biggest Filmation fan I know. So just big picture, what is it about this animated world that has resonated with you so much over all of these years?
I do love it. You're right. And it goes back to when I was about 5 years old. They used to, they all came from CBS. These are the DC Comics ones that they did, and they did them in progression. There was first Superman and Superboy, and then they added Aquaman, and with Aquaman, they added a whole bunch of different superhero shorts. You got Green Lantern, you got Hawkman, The Flash, whatever. And then finally, after the Batman TV show, the Adam West show wrapped up, they finally got the Batman license, and so they had Batman at the end there. And it's fun to watch the progression of it. But as a kid, after school, it was like bonus Batman is really what it was, because that was what we used to watch. It was on Channel 5 in the afternoon, and this was going back to like kindergarten. And I loved the Adam West show at that point, but this was like extra Batman. And of course, it was more colorful being a cartoon. I mean, the live action show was very colorful too, but there was something really exciting about it. You had the villains, and you had all these really cool. I mean, in a sense, it's like a 4th season of the Batman episodes were like a 4th season of the Adam West show, less campy actually, but more kid oriented, and it just stayed with me. And it was one of those things, and years later, because pre-internet, pre-streaming, video, all of that kind of stuff. You just, when it was on, and when it went away, it went away. And I had this sense. It's we all have something that's like this, where you remember something, but there's no evidence of it, and you're like, did I imagine that? Was that a real thing? And so when I was a little bit older, still a kid, they came back, and this time Superman and Superboy shorts were included. And I used to watch them. And I was never, until the Christopher Reeve movie, I was never a big Superman fan. I think it was, as we've discussed. And so with Filmation, this was like an adjunct to that. It was like, I was actually into it more than I was into the George Reeves show at the time. And the Superboy shorts specifically, I really, really enjoyed. I enjoyed them more than the Superman ones at the time, actually. We can get into that. But I think what grabs me about, like, for example, if I compare it to, the natural comparison is to compare it to Super Friends. And the thing about the Filmation cartoons is that they're more kid oriented, but they're also very much like comic books. And the characters, they lean into what makes them popular with, in the comic books. There is actual conflict. There is actual, again, not to sound like a violent type or anything like that, but there are scuffles. They mix it up, and so it's exciting. And when you're talking about Aquaman, it's a beautiful show. It's just got great scenery. So what I like about it is just that it's like DC Comics of that era distilled in these cartoon shorts in a way that, while again really focused on kids, not terribly young kids, but focused on kids, also is extremely satisfying even to this day at the age that I am. I sometimes will just put them on in the background just for, comfort TV. And it just hits me where I live.
Oh, well said. No, it's great to get your take on all of that. And I do have at least some attachment to the Filmation Superman cartoons. I own them on DVD, but I definitely have memories of watching them as a kid, and certainly of renting some VHS compilation from the local video store. So I have that connection point, limited though it might be. At some point in the future, I'm going to have you back here, and I want to do more of a deep dive into the Superman Filmation.
Oh, sure.
Because we will get there at some point.
Really into that. As an adult, I've come to much more appreciate the Superman ones than the Superboy ones. There are still some favorite Superboy episodes, but part of that is also because it's very hard to find the Superboy episodes. I mean, in the 80s, I think what you're probably referring to, there was a release on VHS under the Superpowers branding. And there was a Batman, and there was a Superman, and there was an Aquaman, and there was a Superboy. And so, and each tape had like maybe 4 or 5 episodes or whatever it was. And so for a lot of people, that is their first exposure to it. But it's only been within the last 10, 15 years that they've become widely available, whether it's on disc or whether it's for download or streaming. So you can get most of them, but because Superboy specifically, there have, at least the speculation has been, because of the back and forth over the legal ownership of the character and the royalties and all of that, the Superboy cartoons are very hard to come by. And for a little while, they were streaming with the Superman ones, but they stopped doing that. And so now you kind of have to go through, shall we say, back channel means if you want to find them, or find some, ones that are cut on YouTube. And those come from when they were on Boomerang. So they have a different opening. There's a different,
You're telling me. That was one of the struggles and frustrations, honestly, of even doing this segment here, was finding them. And to your point, yes, I resorted to YouTube there. And shout out, there's a channel called Back to the 80s too.
Yeah.
And they have an hour-long compilation of the first 11 of these Filmation Superboy. So that's what I watched. And of course, I read the titles and descriptions of the remaining ones, but that's what I had to work with. I long for the day that we get a beautiful Blu-ray set of the Superman and Superboy Filmation cartoons. Yeah. That would be great. I own the Batman Blu-ray that they put out. I bought it mostly because of you. You were posting about it. You were excited about it. I was like, oh, all right. But also, you know what? In all seriousness, I wanted to support it.
Yeah.
Because vote with your wallet. And if, to whatever little extent it helps to show, hey, there's an appetite for this kind of content, I would love to get that Superman and Superboy set at some point.
Me too. I agree. And with what they've had on Superman, not all of the Superman episodes have been available, and that's also an issue. So for short periods of little bursts of time, and I think when the Superboy cartoons were on, I want to say HBO Max, when it was called HBO Max, and I got the impression that they were on there by accident.
It was the DC app.
That was the DC app. Okay, DC that was what it was.
Before it became strictly a comics reader.
Right, okay, and that's what it was.
Reminded myself of this because I reread the article that you had done on 13th Dimension.
See, there you go.
This. Right, but you're right, they were just kind of hidden there. They weren't spotlighted in any way. And I agree with you. I think it was a total mistake, and that we were able to take advantage of it for a while it lasted. And so there were some really good memorable ones. There's the episode called The Terrible Trio, which, we could talk about, which is absolutely unhinged and a personal favorite. And there were some other ones that I really got to get back into. But I have always liked the Superboy ones. I've always enjoyed them, even though Superboy as a character has never been one that has been terribly intriguing to me, just because of my own kind of Superman evolution, I guess, for lack of a better term. I understand, and that's definitely been a theme in these discussions, and I know will continue to be. But This is actually the first time I ever watched any of these Superboy shorts. I had a lot of fun with them. What I'll say about these and the Superman ones that I do have memories of watching, I do get the appeal of these Filmation cartoons. And I would say for me, they're mercifully short.
Yes.
The 6-minute runtime is a godsend.
There's no filler.
Yeah. They get you in and out, so they're nice and they're tight. And when we talk about the animation style of Filmation, it's limited. It's pretty basic, limited motion. We're not talking about the gorgeous fluidity of the Fleischer cartoons.
Oh God, no.
And we're not talking about the narrative strengths of Superman the Animated Series, or more recently, My Adventures with Superman. I feel like, it's somewhere in between in terms of both the storytelling and the animation.
Yet, by the way.
You got to watch it. It's so good.
I'm seriously considering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. I went in, I was a little bit skeptical.
Right.
And it really blew me away. I was very pleasantly surprised, but it's very, very endearing. All right. So Filmation Superboy.
Yes.
These were 34 6-minute segments that aired from 1966 to 1969 on CBS. Notably, this is the first Superboy in animation, but also with the exception of the unaired 1961 live action pilot, which didn't see the light of day until more recently. And as a plug of my own, that is the subject of next week's episode. We went deep on this. I had Zach from Always Hold On to Smallville. We did 2 hours on this pilot. We were comprehensive. It was a great discussion. I'm really excited for people to hear that. So if anyone's been wondering, oh, hey, do you guys know there was this unaired 1961 pilot? Boy, do we. And we have a whole episode coming out about it. But other than that, this is the first adaptation of Superboy in other media. And again, certainly the first animation. And I gathered this from Wikipedia, so correct me if any of this doesn't line up with your memory or your understanding, but the first 18 aired with The New Adventures of Superman. The next 8 aired with the Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure, and then the final 8 aired as part of the Batman Superman Hour.
Off the top of my head, I can't say whether that's right or wrong. I have no reason to disbelieve that. But I do know that they were trotted out in groups and that it wasn't all at once. So that sounds like it. That sounds accurate. Now,
a fun bit of trivia that we always like to cite, and you're the perfect person to talk about this with because I know how much you love Batman, but I'll just toss it to you. Who voiced Clark Kent and Superboy?
Bob Hastings. And who later on Batman the Animated Series in that whole Bruce Timm verse of shows was Commissioner Gordon. So the same guy who was Superboy. And he was already an adult in the 60s. I mean, he was on television shows, and you know, Bob Hastings. I'm guessing that the vast majority of your listenership knows who he is anyway. But he was a comic actor and also did some voice work. But I think he does a great job as Superboy, because even I'm always amazed by adults that can actually sound legitimately like kids. Casey Kasem, I think, is a classic example, doing Robin and doing Shaggy. And he was already almost 40 by the time he started doing Robin. But he just had captured that Dick Grayson, the Burt Ward, Dick Grayson kind of style, that overly aggressive. At the same time, he got Stoner Scooby down too. So, Shaggy. But Bob Hastings, I think, does a really good job, and he even does that little slight the voice. It's not as sharp as when. In the Superman cartoons, where the voice change is really noticeable.
This is a job for Superman.
Yeah, it's there, but it's not quite as, and so it's a little bit more subtle, and it's a charming performance.
What stood out to me, a couple of things. One, and this ties right back to what we were saying a minute ago, it really does feel like the comics of the time brought to life. And also, I mentioned the animation and the movement being a bit limited. But I don't say that really as a knock, because one of the things that I've kind of come around on with these Filmation shorts generally is just that the movement is more limited, but it makes it feel more like a comic, like a slightly animated comic book panel in a certain respect. So, but it definitely felt like the comics, particularly in terms of the trappings of the Superboy story. You've got the Kent General store, you've got the Smallville setting, you've got Krypto. Yep. It's Superboy and Krypto in all these stories.
I hate the animal sidekick, or the alien sidekick, or whatever it is, with some rare exception. And I don't say this like as a grouchy old man talking about kids stuff. As a kid, I couldn't stand it. It just like watching the 1977 Filmation Batman series, which, by the way, is also now coming out on Blu-ray, the one with Batmite. I would love it if someone would just re-edit those episodes without Batmite in them. because it just sets my teeth on edge, and always has. Krypto though is awesome. Krypto's great.
Krypto's great. I gotta say, I don't want to forget this. So for years now, I have seen this GIF of Superboy pushing Krypto away while they're flying through the air.
Okay.
Right. If you're on social media and you search GIFs for Superboy, that's one of the first ones that will come up. And I never had the context for it. And I knew just by process of elimination generally where it came from, but I had never seen it. And I'm watching them again, this video on YouTube that has the first 11 of these shorts. And it's, I believe, the third one. There are crooks that come up with this hypersonic signal that irritates Krypto. And so Krypto starts going berserk while Superboy is trying to stop these guys. And the first time he attacks Superboy, Superboy pushes him away. And so the first time I saw this, and I say the first time I saw this in the episode, I was like, there it is. But, they do reuse animation. And so the crooks use this device on Krypto a couple more times in the episode. Right. And so a couple more times in the episode, you get that same imagery of him pushing Krypto. Not that I like seeing this happen to poor Krypto, to be clear, but it's just that for years I have been seeing that on social media, and it's like, that's where it comes from.
That's funny.
So I finally could kind of close that little loop for myself. Yeah.
What I also like about them, and this goes across the board with all of the Filmation, and this is also part of what I find appealing, is that they did a great job with the house style of each individual character that they did. These look like, Kurt Swan or any of the other Superman artists who are working in the era. Same, whether we're talking about Superboy or Superman. Superman especially looks like Kurt Swan. But you also have, even with the others, where Aquaman looks like Nick Cardy's work, and Batman and Robin, it's clearly based on Carmine Infantino's work. So they follow the house styles of the comics of the time, and I think that adds something to it too. That there's a connectivity there that I think that also makes it feel, if not of a piece, but certainly there's shared DNA.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing that stood out to me, and this might just be a function of, I only watched, again, about a dozen of these, and there were 20 plus more that I didn't see.
Right.
But in the ones that I watched, no Ma Kent. I know she is there later on, but at least in these, whenever Clark is with a parent, it's just Pa. Yeah. Does Ma feature more in the others as far as you remember?
I can't remember because it's been so long since I've watched all of them. And I can't actually even say that unlike the others, I haven't seen all of the Superboys, I don't believe, just because they're so hard to come by. So I've seen selections of them, and I might have, when they were on the DC app, I might have watched all of them, but not necessarily paid attention to all of them while I was watching. So I can't be 100% sure.
I don't want to endorse or invite any piracy. Well, at the same time, just in case there's anyone out there listening to this who's like, oh, I have all of them on my hard drive. If you shoot me an email, I'm just saying I probably wouldn't delete it. So I'll just put that out there. I also have very strong feelings about piracy. What I will say though, if there is no other option, sometimes you have to, there's such a thing in the world as moral relativity. Well, listen, no, but this is an important point. This has come up before. Will continue to come up. But, we're sitting here in my studio. Right here is a poster of a film that I made, a documentary called My Comic Shop Country. I know it's out there pirated. It bums me out because you can actually watch it for free on Tubi.
Right.
I get a few cents, but at least that's something.
Right.
Or you could buy or rent it on Apple or Amazon. I would vastly prefer people do that than pirate it. So I do feel strongly about this from a personal sense as well. But to your point, and I brought this up and I'll continue to bring it up, when there is no other option. And this too, with these Superboy discussions, is going to be a bit of a theme here because last week we talked about Golden Age Superboy. There's a beautiful hardcover collection called The Adventures of Superboy that collects those earliest Golden Age adventures. I have a copy, but it's long out of print.
Right.
And then later in this episode, we're talking about a bunch of Silver Age comics. There are some that are collected in the Superboy at 75-year hardcover or are on the app. But there were a lot that I had to resort to Superman Through the Ages website or elsewhere online to find scans because there's really no other resource. And I don't want to be a broken record about this, but DC, I would gladly pay. I would love to give you money for these comics if you made them available.
Well, and it goes with others too. I mean, my son and I have been watching Gatchaman, which may be more familiar to your listeners as Battle of the Planets, which is which we watched after school back in the 70s. And the original Japanese show was not available on disc. So we found a resource, but then as soon as it became available on Blu-ray, we bought the whole series, and that it's like, I am a believer in that too. It's like, look, we did what we were going to do because we wanted to watch it, but as soon as it becomes available, I will pay for it. And I think that that's not unreasonable in what is I know it's a dodgy and sensitive topic. And I myself don't like seeing things that I've posted on 13th Dimension, things that are original and, original piece of art or something. And somebody just takes the piece of art and just posts it on Facebook or whatever. And it's like no credit. They don't say where they got it from, which I don't understand. It's like, are you expecting that you're not implying that you drew it? Yeah. Are you just implying that, hey, I found this and you want do you want the credit? Do you want I've never really quite understood not giving credit where credit's due. So, but anyway, I digress.
No, I'm glad we took a couple minutes on this because it is an issue, especially when we talk about a lot of this older super material, but especially when we talk Superboy and in this realm. So it was worth mentioning. Just circling back to the Ma and Pa piece here, or Pa specifically. One of the things that's emerging as a theme as I'm going through a lot of these older Superboy stories, and the comics in particular, is that the more involved parental role that we've come to associate with the Kents is not really there earlier on. It comes as we get deeper into that pre-crisis territory, at least from the Golden and Silver stories that I've read. Similarly here in these shorts, but there is one exception in one of the shorts that I watched. It's the one where Superboy is blinded. And it's Krypto, the super seeing eye dog. That was one of the standout ones to me. It's kind of a takeoff on Adventure Comics 283, where Superboy gets this chest full of Kryptonian artifacts and weapons, and one of them is a Phantom Zone projector. So it's the first Phantom Zone, and it's the first glimpse of General Zod in the comic. So the animated short is a similar type of setup where he finds these weapons, and Krypto activates one of them accidentally, and Superboy's blinded.
Right.
And he struggles with a couple of rescues. And then there's this scene. I mean, it's so fleeting, but it was enough for me to latch onto, where he's in the Kent living room with Pa and he's really down.
Yeah.
And Pa's initial response left a little to be desired. He's like, well, son, you have other powers. That's like, all right, maybe a little bit of empathy here. But at the same time, when a call comes through the radio from the state police, they're calling for Superboy. Superboy says to Pa, he's like, what should I do? And Pa says, you answer it.
Yeah.
And it was so small, but I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
That's what I've been looking for in a lot of these stories that I wasn't quite seeing. So that one really stood out to me. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, it's not a case of, what was I supposed to do? Let him drown in the bus? Maybe.
All right. Just so for the audience's sake, when I say we did our final word on the Snyder movies, I meant it, but then people bring it up. What am I going to do?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I just want to really quickly just run down the ones that I watched, kind of what the premise was super, super quickly, just to give people a general sense of what the kinds of stories were. So there were a few involving alien invaders.
Yep.
There's one early on where there's this imposter who purports to be a Kryptonian survivor, but turns out that's not the case, and he tries to get the jump on Superboy. There's another one, this was cute, where there were these two aliens wreaking havoc in town, but then it turns out they're alien children.
The kids,
and their quote-unquote weapons were merely toys, and Superboy and Krypto reunite them with their parents and send them off.
I like the mom in that one's got kind of a blonde bob. Not a bob, like a bun. I mean, she just looks like 1960s housewife, and it's just, I'm like, that's, but she's like, has this green face, and she's an alien. And
yes. Yeah. There's the one with the crooks and that hypersonic signal that we talked about. There are a bunch with kind of runaway animals or animal creatures. There's one with this sea dragon that was engineered in a lab that's trying to reunite with its egg. There's another one where there's this crystalloid creature from the core of the earth also trying to reunite with its egg. So that becomes a bit of a theme here. There's another one with an elephant that's transformed into a prehistoric mastodon and runs amok. There's another one with this impish water creature that escapes. So very much a theme. The last one on my list from the ones that I watched, and the one that I think probably stood out the most, was the Super Clown of Smallville. Are you familiar with that one? Where there's this old man who wants to laugh but can't, right? And creates this contest where he'll leave his money to the charity of the winner's choosing if they can make him laugh. So you have all these clowns doing their bits and nothing's working. You know who he reminded me of? Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life.
Wow.
He was sitting there and the look and the voice.
Sure.
Like he looked and sounded. I feel like maybe there, so even subconsciously, that might have been a little bit of an inspiration. It's like a very Mr. Potter vibe.
I like that. That's good. Yeah. My favorite is, it's not on that same clip. It's called The Terrible Trio, and it's basically, it's off the hook. There are three bullies who are tormenting kids at Smallville High School. And so Superboy decides that he's going to teach them a lesson. And it's a, kind of an O. Henry-ish sort of thing where he asks them, like, well, what do you want? And he's like, well, I want to be a big shot. And so in each case, he challenges them to be what they think they want to be. But one case is where he takes this guy, and of course, all of this is criminal. It's Superboy being a criminal. He's kidnapping these people, holding them against their will, and doing all sorts of things that he shouldn't be doing. But so what? He's Superboy, and he's trying to teach him a lesson. And he takes this one kid to a planet, where he wants to, he wants to be a big shot. He wants to rule the world. But it turns out the world is overrun by vegetable people, like people, women who look like tomatoes. And there's corn people, and there's cucumber people, and it's just from that and the other set pieces within the episode, laugh out loud funny. So I'm disappointed that you didn't get to see that as part of these clips, because that's a go-to episode.
I tried. I searched all over YouTube.
Yeah,
I didn't delve into the darker corners of the web. Maybe it's there, but I couldn't find it. But I tried to, because you had spoken about it. But that does sound pretty wild.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. That was mostly what I wanted to say about these. I mean, really, I very much enjoyed the ones that I watched. I love the Superboy Krypto pairing. Like we said, it really felt like an extension of the comics. It had that feel. They're quick. They're fun. A couple that were genuinely compelling or offered something to kind of sink our teeth into. Is there anything else you want to say about these Filmation shorts?
No, they're just really enjoyable. And like you say, it's helpful that they're short. It's helpful that there's no wasted time. It's and I also very much like Superboy and Krypto's chemistry. However they pull that off in a cartoon, they do it well. And, the Superboy in general, look, if you're looking at a world where people fly and come from other planets and all that kind of stuff, you have to suspend a disbelief. I've always found Superboy to be a tougher concept to swallow, because how do you have Superboy in this small town where Clark Kent grew up and have them coexisting, and then Clark Kent moves to Metropolis and Superman comes along? How does nobody make that connection? It's like, I know that, how does nobody make the connection, because he's only wearing eyeglasses too, but it's always kind of pushed the envelope for me. But when you take them on their own terms, they're a tremendous amount of fun, and they're endearing, and they're sweet. And, I'm glad that they did them. And even though I don't get to see them as much as I would like, because of availability, I highly recommend them.
Never say never. Unlikely though it may seem, I will hold on to hope that one day we'll have that Blu-ray set of the Superman and Superboy. At a minimum, though, I look forward to having you back down the line to talk about the Filmation Superman ones. I think that'll be a lot of fun. Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest. I didn't know if I would ever do an episode on the Filmation Superman. I just didn't know if I'd have enough to say about it to really justify an episode.
There's plenty to say.
Well, after even just watching these and getting back into that world, I was like, oh yeah, we have to do this. Yeah, so we'll get there.
And it's great too, because with the Superman, a lot of his supporting cast shows up, and I'm talking about the villains too. The villains, Luthor is in there. And the Parasite is in. They're somewhat slightly different versions, but you get a lot of the classic Superman tropes come through that cartoon. So yeah, I look forward to talking about that.
Right on. All right, so I encourage everyone to check out 13thdimension.com. Anything in particular that you want to plug or add?
One of the things I always like to do, and I get a lot of feedback on every week on Wednesdays, we do retro hot picks. Which is one of my favorite columns to do, where we do an introduction that kind of gives the basically the idea is that we pick our favorite comics, or comics what we would have bought in that particular week in that particular year, and it's mostly Silver Age and Bronze Age. Occasionally we'll pop a little bit into the modern age and a little bit back into the golden age, but it's primarily it's primarily the 60s, 70s, and into the mid 80s, and it's something that is, there's an intro section where I get to scratch a bunch of other itches, talking about history and talking about music and television. that has become one of the most popular features on the site. So, right now we're just doing what we typically do. And if you're into not just, the retro stuff, cause I know that you cover all different eras on the show here, but if you're into that retro stuff and you want something that puts something into perspective in terms of what was going on in the world, particularly the 60s and the early to mid 70s, I really enjoy it. And the feedback has been tremendous since we started doing it. And so I just mentioned that just as something to mention. It's just one of the many features. We've got now, I think, 10 regular contributors to the site. So, we're there every day. We never close. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan. I'm always honored when I get to write something for the site. We recently did the 13 first meetings between Batman and Superman.
I love that story. That was great.
Oh, thanks. It was fun
so much fun to write. I mean, to read. I was like, this is terrific.
Well, we had done the episode, and so I had everything in my head, and I had my notes, and I said, well, this would lend itself pretty perfectly. And even number-wise, I had to cheat a little bit with a couple of bonus ones, but still, it was close enough within that 13 paradigm. I was like, all right, here we go.
I was amazed by that. I didn't realize that it had been that many, but when you do open it up to other media, especially, but that was, I would definitely point people to that piece because that's what I like about getting pieces written by others, because a lot of the time I'm just sitting there, I'm like, hey, this is cool. I'm entertained, and that's always fun. So I appreciate you doing it.
Right. No, I appreciate the opportunity. All right, everyone, check out 13thdimension.com. Dan, thank you once again. Audience, don't go anywhere. Right after this break, I'll be joined by Rich Roney to talk about key Silver Age Superboy comic book stories. We'll be right back. I want to give a shout out to our pal, comic book artist V. Ken Marion, who's been a frequent guest on Digging for Kryptonite over the years. He has a brand new creator-owned comic project called Battle Chronicle Soul Striker that he is currently crowdfunding via Kickstarter as we speak. It's an all-new sci-fi fantasy comic book saga from the creative minds of V. Ken Marion and Jason Matthews. If you've enjoyed Ken's appearances on the podcast over the years, if you've enjoyed his comic book art, I hope you will take a minute, take a look at the crowdfunding campaign. I will include a link in the show notes. Read the description, learn more about it, take a look at the gorgeous preview art. Ken's been working on this for years. He's put so much love and care and attention into it. I wish him all the best with his crowdfunding campaign. I'm a proud backer myself, and I can't wait to see the finished product. Battle Chronicle Soul Striker. Check it out. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Joining me in studio to discuss Superboy in the Silver Age of Comics is returning guest Rich Roney. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir. I know we broke ground on this a week ago with more of a conceptual story about, is there a value? Is there an importance of Superboy? And I went back and I reread stories I read as a child. I read a couple of stories for the first time ever, and I'm very excited to start analyzing some of the selection.
One of the things that I've realized now, whenever we talk about pre-crisis comics and especially Silver Age, I've really thankfully found a way to access these stories in a way that I can enjoy them despite the different sensibilities of the day. But I think that what really makes me have a lot of fun with them is knowing that we're going to talk about them. That just adds this whole other dimension to it. So as I'm reading them, there are things that I find interesting or amusing, but hand in hand with that, I'm like, oh, and then we'll talk about this. So it just heightens all of it.
And to that point, every single morning this past week, every morning as I woke up, as I was either shaving or brushing my teeth or having a cup of coffee, I was thinking about, you know what? We're going to be discussing all these stories. I got jazzed as I read them and I made notes. So I'm primed and I'm very excited for this.
Now, would you like to go chronologically, or is there a different way that you want to tackle this?
I say let's go chronological.
All right, works for me. So the first one, really signaling the start of the Silver Age of comics for Superboy, is Adventure Comics 247 from 1958, introducing the Legion of Super-Heroes. I mean, the importance of the Legion of Super-Heroes to the Superboy and Superman mythology really can't be overstated. It's such a huge component to all of this. And this is where they're introduced. We have initially Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, and Lightning Boy. I know I know. Later,
I commend you. I commend you.
Lightning Lad.
I commend you.
But they show up in the past in Smallville and essentially taunt Superboy with the fact that they know his secret identity, and then reveal themselves to be members of this group from the future and bring him to the future to try out to become an honorary member. And my big takeaway from this, and I jotted down a few notes, is these guys are a bunch of dicks. Right?
On multiple levels. Like you said, they arrive in Smallville, and there's one page where each of them bumps into Clark on the street and goes, "Hey, Superboy," right? And he starts getting like, "Oh my God, there's 3 different teenagers that know my secret identity." And then they take him to the future, and they prank him a couple of times. They put him through these initiation tests, but they deliberately sent out a decoy problem where they kind of test his values. And he has to choose between doing their test or averting a danger, like there was a robot or there was a missile. So they really put him through the ringer.
Yeah, I mean, he has these 3 rounds. So in each round, he goes up against one of them to avert a disaster. And like you said, there's something else that arises, and he splits off and he gets sidetracked. But he is so honorable. He continually refuses to explain what happens. I guess he feels like it would be considered making an excuse.
Yeah, even a few times I think in the panels it said, well, I'm not going to give a lame alibi.
Yeah,
I'm not going to give an alibi. I'm not going to give an alibi. One thing I came to learn is that this whole theme of initiation was a big thing with the Legion. This same thing happened with Supergirl. She had to go through initiation tests. Ultra Boy. There were a number of Legion people who attempted to join the Legion and were rejected. They formed the Legion of Substitute Heroes. But I'll say 2 things at a high level, then I want to turn it over to your analytical prowess. In this story, they travel from Smallville 1,000 years into the future to, I guess, the Smallville of the future. But it's utopia. Just like Krypton was viewed as utopia, this is a utopian future. Really full of hope. So Otto Binder, the writer, really turned that on. The other thing was not just the initiation aspect. It was kind of a precursor or a harbinger of reinterest in superheroes. I mean, this is like a year or 2 after The Flash. For the longest time, they were publishing Westerns, or Westerns were the big thing that pushed the superheroes aside. So I saw this as just, hey, a reawakening of interest in the superhero aspect of thing, maybe a year and a half after The Flash was in showcase.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I kind of just speaking about the Legion generally, how large a part do they play in your DC fandom? Oh,
huge. We're going to get to it, I think, amongst the reading list. We're going to be covering one of the stories we're covering is the first Legion comic I ever purchased. But I always kind of knew about them. They were really confusing as a child because you had all these characters and discerning who had what powers and what their position is, what planet they came from and stuff like that was problematic.
Yeah, I hear you. I wish I could say that I had a ton of affection or appreciation for the Legion. Whatever I do have has grown, but once again, not to be a broken record, but I think this is a function of when I grew up. And although I did meet the Legion of Super-Heroes, the then current version, and I guess for me specifically, I think the first version of the Legion that I met was the post 0 Hour reboot of the Legion.
Oh, was that Tom Pyre and Mark Waid or something like that?
I think so. To be honest, I never read their actual series, but whenever they would pop up in other Superman books particularly.
Yeah, and I think they had, they started with a 0 issue for a host of things. And then didn't they go back with into Metropolis in 1990s current time or something like that.
Yeah, and that will tie in when we talk about the last story on our list, which is echoed in the Final Night story that I love to death. So
Cool.
Again, I do have some connection points with the Legion, but largely divorced from the Superman mythology given when I grew up. And I would say probably the two big exceptions to that would be the New Kids in Town episode of Superman the Animated Series, and then the Legion episode of Smallville, which both follow very similar tracks where you have this trio of Legionnaires coming to Clark in Smallville, giving him this hint of his heroic destiny, but not actually literally taking him to the future. So it's just a little bit of a tease and kind of helps him along his way a little bit. So that's kind of been the sweet spot because those were kind of two very formative exposures to the concept. I've dabbled in Legion over the years. I tried, I guess most specifically, the Mark Waid, Barry Kitson subsequent reboot.
Yeah.
That was in the early to mid aughts of DC. And kind of in all these instances, it just never totally clicked. I feel like this is a very basic complaint about Legion, so I hate to fall into this, but I think the volume of cast members and powers and planets, I don't know if daunting is the right word. It never felt worth the kind of investment in the mental energy to try to learn all of this, but I'm open. And I'll say, really, we only have a couple of Legion stories on this list. So fair warning, audience, this is a relatively Legion light list, but we'll be doing deeper Legion coverage, particularly in the Bronze Age later in this event. But even from this little bit that I've delved into now, I don't know. My interest is growing a little bit. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where I do like a full-on Legion run of episodes, but I'm not opposed to it. And I recognize the importance of this team and this concept in DC lore, in Superboy and Superman lore. Just the notion that Superman is this inspiration that continues to pay off centuries later. And the fact that Superboy gets to go there and have these adventures at a time, and this plays into other stories on our list. One of the themes I would say that emerges here is his loneliness as a teen in Smallville. The fact that he can't share this part of himself. He can't play like with other kids.
You're so right.
The way that he could with other superpower beings. And so to kind of open up this world to him, like I said, and we talked about this a lot last week, there's a lot with Superboy that I've wrestled with, including the Legion piece, but there is something inherently appealing about it. So it was cool to see the first building block of that. But yeah, they're real dicks to him. And so he loses each round of this competition, and they're sending him away. He's crying. I mean, he's literally tearing up. And then they're like, oh, it's just a joke.
Just pranked you.
And they reveal how each of them used their powers to create that diversion. And there was a fail safe in place if Superboy hadn't gotten to that diversion. One of the other Legion members would have taken care of it. So it's a happy ending. And then another real disaster emerges, and he essentially uses a version of their powers.
I thought that was like, okay, you guys were dicks. I'm going to show you I can do the same job with your powers, right? Because he emulated all of their powers in saving South Pole City.
Yeah.
The magnetism and the electrical. That last page was, hey, not only am I powerful, but I can emulate your powers.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting is I've read articles and blurbs and whatnot about this issue. And I feel like they always talk about how the Legion takes Superboy to the future and he's the inspiration for this. But I don't know that you really see that so much in this story. I mean, the fact that they're in Smallville and that his house has been preserved and they're teaching Superboy in class. Okay, I guess that does illuminate a lot, but it doesn't go so far as subsequent stories will, right? Of him literally being the inspiration for all this.
Yeah, I think Paul Levitz touched on that with the Great Darkness saga, where it was played up more how the Legion was inspired by the heroics of Superboy and Supergirl. And that really generated their desire to do the same thing in their contemporary times.
Yes, no, I agree. All right, so the next one, this was a standout one. The Boy of Steel versus the Thing of Steel from Superboy number 68 in 1958. Bizarro Superboy.
This was such a harsh tale. I mean, this was Otto Binder's version of Frankenstein.
Yeah, so we have Professor Dalton in Smallville experimenting with his duplicator ray, and he's making duplicates, but they're imperfect in different ways. And he trips and ends up blasting Superboy with this ray, and this creates this bizarre double that Superboy references as being Bizarre. And of course, this creature mistakes that as thinking his name is Bizarro. Now, my understanding is essentially hand in hand with this, there was Bizarro in the newspaper strip.
Oh, I didn't know that. But I know that about a year later, Otto Binder did an adult version of Superman and Bizarro where he kind of...
Yeah, where Lex recreates the duplicator ray and references this encounter in Smallville. I think the things that stood out to me about this, well, number one, and this kind of is throwing ahead to when we get to the Superboy TV show, but the Superboy TV show gave a very faithful adaptation of the, especially at least with respect to the creation of Bizarro and the public's reaction to him and the pathos. I mean, there's something very heartbreaking, like Frankenstein, right? Like where he is being regarded with fear or disgust or mistrust, and he's just trying to make a connection. There's something very, very resonant about that.
This was so atypical and so uncharacteristic. I mean, two things. I was surprised at how Ma Kent reacted to Bizarro when he came to the house. I was surprised at all the hostility and the disdain, and even Superboy calls him a dimwit and goes, "How dumb could you be?" And he was just so dismissive and so shunning and critical and mean and harsh.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk, I think, in the narration, but also in terms of what the professor relays to Superboy.
Oh, he's not alive.
He's not alive. Like, they really drive home this point of he's not alive.
He's not a living thing, but he's sentient. I mean, he's got emotions and perceptions and feelings, but they repeatedly editorial like, when he, I guess, fell asleep on the Professor Dalton's floor. Oh, well, he must have died, right? He's not a living creature.
The only person in town who shows him any kindness is this blind girl who can't see him.
Melissa.
And Superboy goes so far as to create a dummy of Melissa and use his super ventriloquism to lure Bizarro.
To a military assault.
Yeah, like they blast this guy or attempt to blast him to smithereens, and he withstands all of it, but it's quite the trap that he lures Bizarro into.
Yeah, it was.
He tries using kryptonite on him. I mean, he really goes all out to try to put a stop to this non-living thing.
Again, uncharacteristic. Superboy made no attempt to speak or learn, or he just immediately viewed him as a monster. So I saw this as very atypical for how I was reared and how I came to appreciate Superboy and Superman. Very atypical. I was wondering, do you think Otto Binder deliberately did that to, like, in the reader say, hey, you should be compassionate of others?
Maybe. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would hope. Yeah, I mean, I like to think that would be the ultimate takeaway that the story is trying to impart, and that a reader in the late 50s taking in the story would have. I would like to think that. What really struck me about this, other than what we've already talked about, is that so Superboy figures out that just like the explosion that destroyed Krypton created kryptonite, which is deadly to him, the explosion that destroyed the duplicator ray irradiated the metal fragments, and they are now deadly to Bizarro. And so he brings that into battle. And at this point in the story, right, Bizarro has realized that Melissa is blind, and that's why she was kind to him. She couldn't see him. And he realizes Superboy is there to try to kill him. And he deliberately flies into this fragment of the machine. And when they collide, Bizarro essentially disintegrates. And Melissa's blindness is cured. And Superboy's explanation was that the shock from the blast stimulated her optic nerve. But all I could think about was Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries.
Oh, yes. Yes, I forgot about that.
So, like, this is the thing, and this is why I find this such a fascinating process. So, for most of my reading career, right, I read Byrne's Man of Steel.
I forgot about that.
And there's the Bizarro issue, and similarly there, they collide or whatnot, and again, Bizarro disintegrates, and the dust particles that float down cure Lucy Lane's blindness. And to be perfectly honest, to reveal my own ignorance, I never knew that was a nod to anything. And so reading this, I was like, oh,
Wow.
like that's what that whole bit was about.
I never made that connection till you just said it.
Yeah.
That's wild.
The funniest thing to me in this entire issue, like genuinely funny, was when Bizarro, he sees people making a sculpture of Superboy's head, and he wants to do something akin to that. So he carves Superboy's face into a mountain as a tribute to Superboy. And then
best laid
lightning
plans.
strikes, and it shatters the mountain and essentially turns the bust into a version of Bizarro's face. Yeah. And everyone takes it as a threat. It's like, look, he's carving his face into the mountain. He's showing us he's our enemy. Heartbreaking, but also hilarious.
Yes. It reminds me of the Mount Rushmore thing with the flying fox.
Yes.
But emotionally, this is the first I'd ever read this story, ever. And it was heartbreaking, that this is clearly a sentient. You have tremendous sympathy for this, the pain this character is going through. And no matter what happens, nobody's, absent Melissa, no one's making any effort to connect with him.
Yeah, he shows up at Smallville High, and he's like a bull in a china shop, and he's, trying to participate in gym class, but he's tearing everything apart. But yeah, ultimately, he's just trying to find a place to belong and to find some sort of connection, and is just regarded with such hostility because of the way he looks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story. Not collected anywhere to my knowledge, or at least not anywhere that's currently in print, unfortunately. But it's definitely worth a read. I found it very interesting.
I agree.
Now, the next two on our list kind of go hand in hand, and they're both collected in Superboy, the greatest team-ups ever told. So there's Superboy meets Robin, the Boy Wonder from Adventure Comics 253 in 1958, and Superboy meets Supergirl from Superboy number 80 in 1960. And I guess I'll toss it to you. I like, generally speaking, I guess what's interesting about it is this reminder that although as Superman, he'll be surrounded by all of these other superpowered beings and members of the super family, in these stories, other than Krypto, he doesn't have that.
You're so right.
And so when he has these encounters through time travel in both of these cases, it allows him to share this sense of camaraderie that he wouldn't otherwise, particularly with Supergirl. I mean, they full on play, right? Like they're playing catch in space and hide and seek across planets and racing each other. So yeah, I don't know. It was intriguing on that front. What stood out to you about these?
Well, I'm going to separate them, right? So the Robin story, in this instance, Robin goes back in time. Batman's away on an adventure. Robin gets a call from Superman. There was some trophy or some special gift given to Superman when he was Superboy. And a villain had planted a kryptonite bomb in it and explodes. And just before Superman, or in the process of dying, he calls Robin and says, I need your help. Robin decides to go back in time through Professor Nichols' time, whatever he did in the 1950s and 60s. Now, I kind of wonder, why didn't Robin go back like 10 days earlier? Why did he go back 15 years earlier, right? The only thing I could attribute that to, but it's still, I am undermining my own analysis. Robin needed to see the exact trophy that caused the explosion so he could dismantle the bomb or save it, prevent it from exploding. So maybe he needed to see what were you awarded at this event. But what really drove me nuts at one point in here, Superboy starts wondering if Robin's not a bad guy because he's doing, questionable things like he's trying to get Superboy's fingerprints and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's a lead-lined pouch in the utility belt.
Yeah. And apparently all you need to do to convince Superboy that you're a good guy is have a great, profound imagination. Because all Robin does is tell Superboy superheroic actions he's going to take as Superman. But Superboy can do all those same things now. And everything that Robin described, Superboy was capable of doing literally that minute in terms of his prowess or abilities. So I don't understand why Superboy, oh, you must be good because all you need is a powerful imagination to pull this off.
What stood out to me about this, and what I think kind of ties in with a bigger picture question that I have and that I want to get your take on, is at the end of the Superboy story, or Supergirl story rather, Supergirl realizes that it's problematic if Superboy retains his memory of her visit to the past to play. Because, and I know I'm jumping to that next story, but essentially both Supergirl in the present and Superboy in the past are encountering a similar problem, right? They don't have playmates their own age. And so Supergirl travels to the past, and she and Superboy have a quote-unquote super romp as they're enjoying all of these activities together. But she realizes it's problematic for him to retain this knowledge of her existence. And so Superboy goes off to this alien world where there are plants that emit a fragrance that if you inhale them, you forget the previous week. It's very specific. You forget an entire week's worth of events here. But I guess what's interesting is there's nothing to that effect in the Robin story. And you and I have looked at World's Finest stories where Superboy has this knowledge of the future and his future team ups with Batman, and that plays into his adventures in the past with Bruce.
And now I checked that deliberately for this. And apparently this was Adventure 253, the time scope where Superboy, if he were bored, could look into the future, was, I think, Adventure 275. What I wondered on this, on just one quick sidetrack, they capture Luthor as a bank robber in this thing. But Luthor was appreciably older. I mean, he looked much older than other stories, right? And he was a bank robber. But the other thing that kind of puzzled me, to your point, when Superman meets Batman and Robin for the first time, shouldn't he remember Robin? Hey, this is the guy, but, or did he, obviously, no one's going to show the intensity of thought that I'm voicing right now. But did he just choose not to say, yeah, I know in a few years you're going to go back in time to save me?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
Because he had the same costume.
And ultimately, we find out that it's the owner of the stadium that's hosting the
Gambling
science
debts?
fair. Yeah, he has gambling debts, and he's trying to destroy the stadium and
Get
take
the insurance.
Superboy out for the insurance money, and that was what leads to that clock trophy. So, Robin and Superboy are able to avert that. But I guess even putting aside whether memories are erased or not, we have this story where he meets Robin, another where he meets Supergirl. There are a bunch of other stories in that team-up trade paperback where he has these encounters with other
Green
members
Arrow.
of the DC universe earlier in time. And honestly, the next story on our list, How Luthor Met Superboy, which I've touched on before, but we could just hit on that again as well. It points to this larger thing, a potential problem maybe with the Superboy of it all, of that characters he's not meant to encounter until later are popping up in these Superboy stories. And to be honest, even my beloved Smallville, I think that's something that critics of the show certainly pointed out. And I think even among us fans, maybe it's something that we've wrestled with a little bit as well, that he's meeting all of these people so much earlier than you typically expect. And I think there can be value in it, but I don't know. It begs the question, does it undermine the Superman story to any extent? I don't know. How do you feel about this, especially in the context of these stories?
I don't mind. I don't mind having a story that shows a new facet of the relationship, or they meet and they don't connect the dots, or when they look back in hindsight, they don't connect the dots that, oh, that was that guy, right? I mean, they're intriguing from a popularity standpoint. I'm certain this must have sold books off the newsstands, Superboy and Robin, because that you never saw that before. It's a fine line, right? Can you tell a previously unknown backstory that enriches the thing? Or does, like you say, does it undermine and cheapen and diminish the real thing? I'm kind of fearful that it could diminish the real thing.
It's tough. And like I said, with the Smallville TV show, by the time that show is over, Clark has met and battled not just Lex, but Zod and Doomsday and Brainiac and Toyman and Metallo.
And knows the Legion and has basically formed a Justice League.
Yeah, it was essentially married to Lois, if not for their wedding ceremony getting interrupted. So, I mean, that's a completely different spin on it, where Lois is there for the creation of the dual identity. They're, again, almost married before he even becomes Superman. So, I don't know. It's just kind of, it's interesting. And I guess inherently I do get the appeal or the desire to want to tell those stories, to try to position a younger incarnation of this character against these characters or situations and see how they play out with the knowledge that we have of the future legend. So I get it. But again, I think it's an interesting question. What's the matter?
No, I'm so sorry. This popped into my mind the second, but as you alluded to maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago, one of the things that occurs here is that Robin is collecting Superboy's fingerprints and hiding them in this lead pouch in his utility belt. And when Superboy questions, he goes, "Oh, I was saving that as a birthday present for you in the future." Well, Robin must have been pretty confident he was going to save Superboy. Not only does he have a huge imagination and the ability to be a con artist, and yeah, I can prove I know you. But he must have been really confident that he's going to make sure he wins on this one.
Yes, no doubt.
The only thing that impressed me in the Supergirl story, I saw this pattern repeated multiple times, and it was always a done in one. And to me, this was the first story that established that pattern of, hey, super loneliness. No, that's a bad choice of words. Intense loneliness. Then I get a superpowered being I can hang out with and play with, and I've got a friend that can match me on my level. And then the last page is heartbreak. So that Supergirl story I saw reiterated a number of other times.
Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Now, the next one on our list here, How Luthor Met Superboy, it's such a fascinating story because now we have the insertion of this backstory between Superboy and Lex in Smallville, where he's got his full head of hair and he moves to town and he saves Superboy from kryptonite and they become fast friends. And it turns out Lex is a huge Superboy fan. He's got this entire room devoted to him, this shrine with all this memorabilia. Again, it's the echoes of these stories are kind of amazing because there's a part in the Smallville TV series where Clark learns that Lex has this entire room devoted to Clark and all of the mysterious goings on that Lex hasn't been able to figure out. So it's a different spin on it. It's not a positive shrine, so to speak, but it is this room with all of these items and files and images pertaining to the things about Clark that Lex can't explain.
Didn't Byrne do that same thing when he did the ongoing Superman run, where there was some issue where Luthor's computers say Superman is Clark Kent, and he gets really angry. But there was like 3 or 4 pages where I think Superman discovered what he called the Shrine to Superman.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can't picture it offhand, but no, totally. So again, you have this Lex who's again a fan of Superboy, and Superboy, to repay Lex for saving him from the kryptonite, builds him this state of the art lab. And Lex is working on essentially creating life. He creates this protoplasm, right, over the course of the story. And as a thank you to Superboy, creates this antidote that will cure him, make him immune to kryptonite poisoning. But this lab fire breaks out, and Superboy shows up and uses his super breath to put out the fire. But this explosion occurs, and the resulting fumes cause Lex's hair to fall out. And we get what I would say is probably a pretty iconic panel, right, of him with the newly bald head yelling at Superboy. And it's funny, I think in the past, as I've looked at this story, I've focused more on how this story accounts for Lex's baldness. But the baldness really is secondary in this story. What really, I don't think he's happy about losing his hair, but what really fuels the animosity is this feeling that Superboy did this on purpose, that Superboy was jealous of the fame that Lex was going to attain as the scientist with this discovery that he's been working on. And that really forms the basis for that animosity between them.
Well said. No, well said. And we saw that was the blueprint for 2 other stories we referenced earlier, whether it was Mark Waid's Birthright or Jeff Johns, that they knew one another in Smallville. They didn't start out, with a friction or animosity. They could have been friends. Like even in Birthright, when they're up on the roof looking at the stars and they're speaking about astronomy, they shared that love. And also Lex appreciated Clark's intelligence. A little bit similar in the start of Secret Origin. So this story was the blueprint for that. And as you say, the loss of hair is secondary. It's more like the jealousy and the perceived threat that, no, I'm top dog. You're not going to undermine that.
Absolutely. And like I said, I don't mean to always bring up Smallville, but I feel like if ever there was a place for it, it's this. And what I'm just so struck by is how they were able to extrapolate on that television series what we get here, which is a relatively short story. I mean, the period of time in this story where Superboy and Lex are friends is just a few pages, right? That very quickly takes a turn. So to kind of extrapolate from that, what we got on that television series where you had this genuine friendship for years that then falls apart for a variety of reasons. It's highly formative to me, but I think it's truly compelling. I recognize it's not the only way to spin this story, and we've had other takes on Lex, which we've talked about, that completely omit a past between them, and you don't necessarily need it. There are definitely other ways to account for why Lex would hate Superman. So it's always interesting to see how it plays out. But I really do like this dynamic of this broken friendship. I guess the last thing really quickly is just after the balding, then Lex goes about trying to prove his scientific prowess, and he creates this heat lamp to keep the town warm in the winter, but overdoes it, and essentially it's going to fry the town, and Superboy has to fix it. And then he creates these genetically modified seeds that will create these oversized, bountiful plants and vegetables, but he doesn't account for the water from rain and how that will interact with them. And then everything's overgrown. And again, Superboy has to step in.
We discussed this, and it was fascinating how, maybe Lex wasn't the competent scientist he perceived himself to be. Maybe he had feet of clay, because 2 of these things he really made a miscalculation. The 2 things you just referenced.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, I love the idea of Lex being this brilliant mind. But then on the other hand, to your point, it's like, maybe he's not the genius he purports to be. And why, when he always claims to Superman, if not for you, I would have done X, Y, and Z. It's like, maybe you wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So moving along here, The Dreams of Doom from Superboy number 83 in 1960. First Kryptonite Kid. I would say my first experience, well, to be honest, I think only experience before this story with this character was Kryptonite Man in Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and that final duel between him and Krypto that results in both of them losing their lives.
Yeah.
But this introduces the character, and essentially both Superboy and Krypto are having these dreams of Kryptonite Kid and Kryptonite Kid's dog, who are green-skinned and emitting kryptonite radiation, and most specifically can turn objects into kryptonite. And this was such a weird story to me, not to jump to the end, but Kryptonite Kid has Superboy and Krypto against the ropes, like they're done for, and then out of nowhere, a Deus Ex Machina, if ever there were one, Mxyzptlk shows up.
Yeah.
And just dispatches Kryptonite Kid, because if he takes out Superboy, then that will spoil Mixie's fun.
Right. If I can, this was the one story I'm going off memory. This appeared in one of the 80-page giants. But as you said, the Kryptonite Kid, and he's got a parallel dog to go up against Krypto. But he was so powerful. I mean, he was invading the dreams. He was like, Superboy couldn't sleep. Both he and Krypto were getting scared during their dreams. But then I remember stories where they were like in a playground and the Kryptonite Kid touches a sliding board, or the whole playground becomes kryptonite. And then a few panels later, all these row houses get full of kryptonite. And like you said, the last page, all of a sudden, a young version of Mxyzptlk comes and goes, nope, I'm going to get rid of the Kryptonite Kid because I want to be the one to take. But I really wondered, did they paint themselves into a corner because he had so much power?
There was in their defense, and this was a Jerry Siegel written story. In their defense, it's like a panel or two earlier in the story where Superboy suspects it might be Mxyzptlk who's behind this. So I think they were trying to at least set this up so it doesn't come completely out of nowhere, but I don't think it really works. So I wonder, it really does kind of feel exactly the way you just described it. And Mixie undoes all of the everything that's been turned to kryptonite. And we do get Kryptonite Kid's backstory where he was this criminal from another planet and he passed through a green space cloud and he developed these powers. So I don't know. It was intriguing. There's another appearance of Kryptonite Kid from Superboy number 99 that I own a physical copy of. I bought it at All Yeah Comics in Harrison, New York, and we'll get to that at some point. I don't know if it'll be part of an episode, but I do plan to read it at some point. But this was the first appearance. Now, speaking of first appearances, Superboy's first public appearance from Superman number 144 in 1961. Honestly, the one thing that I guess I have to say about this is it was surprising. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was ultimately surprising to me how out in the world Superboy gets as quickly as he does, right? Where he has this conversation with Ma and Pa, trouble's breaking out. He's like, I think it's time for me to become Superboy. And they encourage him to do this. And he dons the costume and he saves the day. And he goes from, the police to the mayor, to the governor, to the president. And why I say it's not surprising because, again, the world knows of Superboy in these stories, so I shouldn't have been shocked. But I think, going back to last week's discussion and this tension, I think one of the ways that I can wrap my head around Superboy a little bit more is if he's more contained, right? If he's having adventures in the future or in Smallville, and even though the people of Smallville know him, if not that much attention is called to this bigger picture.
But when you're hanging out with FDR.
Yeah, it's just like, oh no, he's just full on out there. The whole world knows about him. So that's the main thing that struck me.
The thing that made me laugh, there was one line in here, I think when one of the police chief is speaking with him, and he goes something like, hey, come with me, Superboy. So I guess that's the derivation of his name, Come on, Superboy. But it moved so quickly because what was it, like a 9 or a 10-page story? And right after he does his first adventure, like you said, he moves from the police chief to the mayor to the governor to the president.
Yeah. This is as good a place as any. Just real quick, I meant to talk about this last week, but I'll just mention it here. We talked about how other media adaptations skipped over Superboy, but even in the comics, there was the retelling of Superman's origin in Superman number 53 on the 10-year anniversary of Action number 1. And that story, very curiously, just skipped over Superboy, even though Superboy had been part of the story now for a few
8
years.
years, yeah.
Well, this was 48, so,
I'm sorry.
so just like 3 years at this point. But still, and it's not until we get to Superman number 146, the complete story of Superman's life, and you and I have talked about that, but that one now tries to, reconcile all of this and put it all together in one story. But it just, talking about Superboy's first public appearance here, just made me think of that. I just wanted to reference that. Other media adaptations aside, it even took the comics a while to be like, okay, yeah, this is how it all strings together.
Yeah.
All right. The Phantom Superboy from Adventure Comics number 283 in 1961 by Robert Bernstein and George Papp. I mean, this gives us the Phantom Zone and, briefly, but still, General Zod.
I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was on the list.
Oh, okay. Do you have any recollection of it from back in the day or no?
I'm so sorry.
Totally fine. No worries.
No.
So essentially, no, it's all good. So Professor Lang, on one of his archaeology expeditions, they encounter this chest and they can't open it and they need to bring in Superboy. And it turns out to contain all of these Kryptonian weapons and artifacts. And one of them is the Phantom Zone projector. And there's also this helmet that kind of beams all of this information into him. So he learns about this prison that Kryptonian criminals were sent to. Are you okay?
No, I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued. And I'm trying to see if I remember fragments of it or panels from a different story.
But essentially, while Superboy is going through all of these, this little lizard steps on the button and Superboy gets sent into the Phantom Zone. So the Phantom Zone is not realized the way it will be in later stories where it's this other dimension and you see him there. Here, Superboy is essentially literally a phantom in Smallville, so no one can see or hear him. But the trick of this issue is the electric typewriter.
Gotcha. I do remember this.
Which they have at the Kent store. And Lana has this whole theory early on about how essentially brainwaves can function as these as electricity, and you can use that to control the typewriter. And that's what Phantom Superboy does. And he types out a letter to Pa Kent.
I do remember that at the very end. Telekinetically or telepath. Yeah, okay.
But while Superboy is getting this history lesson via the helmet, he learns about General Zod, who tried to overthrow the government and stage a coup, and who used this duplicator ray to create an army. And they look just like the Bizarros, and Superboy remarks on that.
Interesting.
This is such a... The issue itself was fine. Like, it was a fine issue. If for purposes of the story in and of itself, I think there are better, more interesting, more compelling ones on our list. But just in terms of how important this would prove to be with respect to what it introduces to the mythology, it's really kind of astounding.
That's wild. So it really is the first Phantom Zone, the first Zod.
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
So that's Adventure Comics 283. So now also in 1961, we have Superboy's Big Brother from Superboy 89, the Mon-El introduction. And this is one that's included in the Superboy 75-year hardcover. And you sent me a list of about a handful of other stories that all told like a version of this, where someone shows up as seemingly potentially a brother to Superboy and functions in that role, and then it turns out not to be the case, and there's this bittersweet farewell. Amazing.
Yeah. This story, Superboy's Big Brother, is the premise is beat for beat the same thing as a story from 1953, Superman's Big Brother. And it's exactly the same. A being from another planet their rocket ship happens to hit Krypton, coincidentally in Jor-El's backyard. And he gives, whether it's the Golden Age version with Superman's Big Brother or Mon-El, he gives them a map that kind of shows them how to get to Earth. And under both instances, they arrive, they crash on Earth. Superman or Superboy find them, and they assumes, oh, you must be my older brother.
I guess they really liked this story.
They matched it beat for beat. And even in the Superman story, Hal Carr starts flirting with Lois, which annoys Superman. And I think in the story that we're discussing now with respect to Superboy, Mon-El starts flirting with, or appears to flirt with Lana, which irks Superboy.
Yeah.
Now, I got to throw one thing at you. Maybe you picked up on it. What the hell was the relevance of that time travel story?
I don't know. I think they needed to fill some pages.
That's exactly. Hey, we're short 3 pages. To your listeners, this was a 2-part story. Maybe I'm thinking 9 pages and 9 pages, something like that. But the second part of the 2-part story, Superboy goes back into ancient Egypt and it basically comes up with a version of Cinderella.
Yeah, the original basis for the Cinderella
Right?
story. Yeah.
But it didn't tie in.
Yeah, it really stuck out like a sore thumb. I can only imagine maybe that they needed to fill some pages. I mean, it's kind of like a weird, interesting slice of life insight into his school life, but it does not connect with this larger story.
And it was a dumb move. I mean, didn't they do some narrative where like, I don't want to get 100. I'll just get a 90 so
Yes.
they don't. So, but he could have gotten a 90 just making a few mistakes. He didn't have to time travel by going out in the hall to get a drink of water.
I guess he was just that curious. I don't know. But throughout the story, like again, and you laid out the overall beats, and so we have Mon-El's backstory. We and we the reader and Superboy won't get that until later, but as the story unfolds, Superboy suspects this could be his brother. I love the funniest thing to me, other than the Cinderella bit, is that Mon-El poses as this traveling salesman, and
Bob
Pa
Cobb.
Kent suggests, why don't you call yourself Bob Cobb? Bob Cobb? What the hell kind of name is that? Especially if you're trying to pick something nondescript. Bob Cobb? Bob Cobb.
And he's the quintessential, like a Fuller Brush salesman, right? From the 1930s, the jacket and the hat. And really, you're going to have this alien immediately become a door-to-door salesman in 1930s middle America, rural farmland.
Yeah, it's crazy. But Superboy grows suspicious because Krypto doesn't recognize Mon-El. And of course, he gets his name because he shows up on a Monday and he's allegedly from the House of El, so Mon-El. But Superboy doesn't recognize him. And Krypto doesn't recognize him. And Superboy recognizes that the material that his belt is made out of is an unfamiliar element. And then he gets suspicious. And so while Mon-El is sleeping, he exposes him to kryptonite and it has no effect. So he's like, this guy, he must be an imposter. And so Superboy's next step is to rain down these lead spheres that he's painted green as this kryptonite shower. Because he assumes Mon-El will pretend to be hurt by it, and then that will reveal that, okay, you're just faking. But Mon-El is in pain because, as we find out, and now Mon-El's memory is jogged, lead is to Daxamites what kryptonite is to Kryptonians, but worse because it's not reversible. It's not the case where, okay, if you get him away from the lead, he's all right. So the lead jogs his memory, but he's dying from this lead poisoning, and Superboy, rightfully so, feels very guilty about this. And his fix is to send him to the Phantom Zone. But it was, it's interesting the ways into these characters and concepts and dynamics that we all have, depending on our frame of reference and when we got into all of this. So for me, any attachment, so to speak, that I might have to Mon-El comes from the Supergirl TV series, where he featured prominently for a couple of seasons and continued to make appearances throughout the rest of the show here and there. And then the post-Infinite Crisis Jeff Johns run on Action Comics, and then the new Krypton saga. They brought Mon-El back, and Johns retold this story.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it was one of the Action Comics annuals. So I've experienced this story, but through the modern Jeff Johns prism. So now to go back and read the original one, it was interesting.
Gotcha.
And I think taps into what we've already seen and addressed here about this desire for kinship
and friendship,
and just to have another superpowered being, because like we've said in this portion of the story, he doesn't have that.
Yeah. As you said, the things that that I look back on this, it was so weird at that, like you said, at one point, hey, Krypto did not recognize him and was almost vicious or protective. And then that metal on the belt was not from Krypton. But it was really so creepy and so weird when Superboy gets like that kryptonite emitting ray, and while Mon-El's sleeping, he like bathes him in kryptonite. He goes, he's not reacting. He must be a villain, right?
Yeah.
But what made me laugh, Anthony, the last time we got together, we did all the first meetings of Superman and Batman, and we both loved that one annual. But this, of all the stories we've read today, I laughed out loud on the last panel of this story when, after Mon-El's put into the Phantom Zone, he basically goes, "Farewell, my brother. Don't forget to rescue me from this invisible dimension." Yeah. Don't forget to rescue me,
I know. Between Mon-El and the Kandorians, Superman doesn't have a great track record.
Well, and even on this one, the last page, on one panel goes, "Don't worry, I'm going to put you in here temporarily until I can come up with an antidote and rescue you." And then 2 panels later, "I'll get to that when I'm Superman. I guarantee you."
I know. I mean, I love that you call him Mon-El. When we talked about Kandor, I feel like you always go for the more exotic pronunciations. I like it. Yeah, the Supergirl TV show, and I think the Legion of Super-Heroes animated movie went with Mon-El, but hey, it's all good.
I never, this is my lack of
It's all good. It's all
being
good.
Current.
I like it. All right, so our next one is Pete Ross's Super Secret from Superboy number 90 in 1961. Did I love this issue? First of all, though, I got to say, Clark does not have much luck sharing a living space with someone and trying to change under the cover of darkness, because this is essentially what we saw in that first
Batman,
World's Finest meeting, right? Where, or in the issue of Superman, where they're on the cruise ship and they're both trying to change, and then the light comes through the porthole and their identities are revealed. Similarly here, Clark and Pete are out camping. And
lightning.
Yeah, and as Superboy is changing, lightning strikes and Pete sees, but Superboy doesn't realize that Pete's awake. What I loved about this was that even before the identity, you see what a stand-up guy and a loyal friend Pete Ross is, where there are some other guys who are throwing a party or something, and they tell Pete, like, "Don't bring that drip, Clark." And he's like, "Well, if you don't want Clark, I'm not coming. He's my friend." So he's standing up for Clark even before any Superboy piece.
Can I interrupt? There was an issue, I don't know how many issues earlier, I think it was 86, where Pete Ross is introduced for the first time ever. And even in that issue, it starts out, I think Pete Ross is going to the Kent store, and some other kids are picking on Clark on the street. And Pete steps in and really stands up, and he fights the other guys and basically kicks their ass. He was a real decent guy.
And after he learns the secret identity, he protects it. And he doesn't tell Clark that he knows. He just helps him. What I loved about this echoes on Smallville in season 4. There was a very similar dynamic where Chloe learned Clark's secret, that he has powers. She didn't know the full story about his alien heritage yet, but she learned that he had powers. And for that half a season before she got the full story and she and Clark actually spoke about it, she would just help him. She would come up with an excuse for him so he didn't have to make one. And she would give him these outs. And it was, he didn't really know what to make of it because it was odd. Like, he was dropping all of these they really, they maybe were beating people over the head with it after a while. But similar type of dynamic, like a friend who learns and really tries to be a friend and doesn't call them out on it, doesn't expose the secret, but just tries to make their path a little bit easier.
Very altruistic. And it struck me how, and even I saw it in later stories in time, Pete was always protective of Clark and the identity. So that altruism and that almost sacrifice was very impressive. And like you said, early on, when Pete's invited to a party, and he basically says, "Look, no, if the condition is I can't be friends with Clark, well, screw you. I'm not going to do it."
The only knock on this story, and it's not a knock on this story, but is that it kind of made it clear to me how they really did Pete dirty post-crisis, because he honestly never really had a ton to do, and most of his business had to deal with being the one Lana very clearly settles for.
I know.
And it puts them in a tough position. And the instances of a true friendship between them really were few and far between. And in recent years, I don't know offhand that the character's gotten much, if any, play. I think this is a missed opportunity.
I agree. And one thing I will say, you referenced this. The other importance of this story, it introduced a brand new plot element that they were able to leverage in a number of stories I read in the 60s. But I do remember, wasn't Pete Ross the vice president to
Yes.
Luthor?
Yeah.
Okay. So I do think it was a mistake not to have him preserving the secret.
Yeah, him as vice president, that at least put a little meat on the bone, but that only got us so far. But the last days of Ma and Pa Kent from Superman number 161 in 1963 by Leo Dorfman and Al Plastino, this was another wild one where I guess, I don't think I'd ever read this story. I guess I've read about it at points, but you find out why the Kents are not around. I mean, we had seen obviously in earlier tellings of the Superman origin that they pass away right before Clark leaves and goes to Metropolis. But the setup to this was, if you had told me, or if you had asked me, how do you think the Kents die? My gut would have been, isn't it just old age or disease or whatnot? And I think that would have been a very natural
This
answer.
was bizarre.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
Superboy builds them a cruise ship.
yeah. And how did Pa Kent manage that ship all by himself?
I don't know. So they end up on this island and they dig up, is it a full-on treasure chest? Right?
Yes. And there's a parchment or half of a parchment from Peg Leg Jones or something like that. I can't remember. And you're given a red herring. You know, you think that they ate certain fruit that created a virus.
Well, because Superboy takes them back in time to 1717 to look for Blackbeard's treasure, right? They find this treasure chest. They, like you said, they have this note and they're curious. And Superboy, he's checking up on them on their vacation here and he takes them back in time. And yes, they eat this fruit. And back in the present, they come down with this fever plague, right? And seemingly it's from the fruit. And Superboy's really beating himself up over this because he brought them into the past. And he tries everything to try to save them.
Phantom Zone,
that doesn't work. There's like solar flares or something, and it interferes with the magnetic activity.
I think you can only go halfway in.
Luthor shows up with this ray to heal them, and he beams it on them for like an hour, and it doesn't work, and he's cruel about it. But
Luthor goes, you know what? I'm glad it didn't work because your father would have been there at my hearing, and he might have voted to keep me in jail.
But another instance of Lex. It's like this guy, another invention that clearly doesn't work. And they pass. Now, here's what got me about this story. Pa makes Superboy promise to continue to be a force for good, essentially.
Oh, I know where you're going.
And the first thing after they're gone is he
Spider-Man
decides to give up being Superboy because he blames himself. He took them into the past, and that's how they ate this fruit and caught this fever plague. And it's just like, you promised this man on his deathbed.
Yeah, minutes ago.
Yeah.
Right. And there was definitely a Spider-Man-esque vibe where I'm going to renounce my superhero identity, but based on the guilt.
Yeah. Well, it's also like I don't know if you saw the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movie, but spoiler alert, but when Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy dies, as he's dying, he makes Peter promise to stay away from Gwen. And that lasts all of 2 scenes. There's the funeral, and then they're in class together, and they're like smiling at each other. And it's like, clearly they're off and running. And it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough thing, I think, to renege on a deathbed promise like that. But then he realizes that they didn't die. They didn't catch the fever plague from the fruit, but rather from the parchment.
Right.
In the present, which I don't mean to be too harsh, but it was still Superboy's fault that they were even on that island.
No, Anthony, I was going to say that. I mean, because when he learns it's from the parchment, he kind of goes, oh, well, thank God it's not my fault. Well, it kind of is. You're the guy that took him back in the past. You helped open the chest. So he does, I think, have to bear a degree of responsibility. The only thing I did like about this was I found it interesting that this was a Superman story.
Yeah.
That it starts out, I guess once a year he goes to the gravesite I was impressed by it being a Superman story that had him recall this, but it totally deviated from my memory of how they died.
It's weird. And I think we've talked a lot about whether one or both of the Kents should die as part of the story. And what I would say, if the Kents need to die, and I think that's debatable and it depends on the story you're telling, but if they're going to die, I think old age, natural causes is probably the best way. Jonathan's heart attack. I mean, I think there are ways that, I don't know, just fit better. Even something like the car crash in the New 52, I would take over this. This is just weird. Just weird, but fascinating to read. All right, the last one on our list is the Fatal Five from Adventure Comics number 352 to 353, 1967, by Jim Shooter and Kurt Swan. Now, like I said, we didn't have a ton of Legion on this list, but we started and ended with the Legion. And in this Fatal Five story, the Legion teams up with their adversaries, the Fatal Five, to try to stop the Sun Eater from devouring the sun in their solar system. And over the course of this story, Ferrolad, a relatively new member of the Legion, sacrifices himself to detonate this device in the heart of the Sun Eater. Oh, so what stands out to you about this?
Well, I think I've said it. I apologize like 3 or 4 times. This was the first Legion book I ever purchased. And it was a 2-part, 352 and 353. But I can remember this. I read this at the same time the TV show The Green Hornet was showing for the first time. So it was really an era of superheroes. I think this story, it holds up very, very well. I mean, Jim Shooter, who was only like 14 or 15 years old, he introduces the Sun Eater, which is a threat to the universe. He narrows it down to 5 Legionnaires and 5 villains. And each villain has a distinct personality, but they're forced to team up to work to save the universe. I thought for the benefit of your listeners, the plan was pretty intriguing. They were all stationed in like a V, and they were trying to lure the Sun Eater towards them.
Yeah, so Sunboy was going to use his powers to lure the Sun Eater, and then the Persuader, right, was going to use the axe.
Yeah.
To split it up, and then the rest of them would use augmented powers. Right, because they had bombarded themselves with antimatter energy to increase their powers, and they were going to each try to destroy their fragments, but one by one they fail.
Right. Shooter the other thing, it was very convenient. They did try to say, we can't get our other Legionnaires. Let's enlist other heroes in the universe. And the doors closed either from distance or a lack of interest. All the other heroes say, nope, not for us. Which from a plot standpoint was a smart move because it would have taken away from the 5 villains. He gave each of the 5 villains a distinct personality. As I read back on it now, Emerald Empress it clearly has some like salacious hots for Superboy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I didn't pick up on it when I first read it, but it was well done. The second part, what I found most interesting and resonated with me even later, was that they have the opportunity to take a bomb into the very heart of the Sun Eater. Superboy volunteers to do it, but Ferrolad turns to Iron and just clocks him. And then Ferrolad goes in, places the bomb, and explodes it, sacrifices his own life to destroy the Sun Eater. That blew me away because I had known about that character. He had been around for like 6 or 7 issues. I understood Silver Age stories when they'd killed, the first time you ever see the guy, the sentient robot, he dies at the end, or this guy comes out of Kandor and he dies. Here, this was enormous because this was a popular character in the Legion, and to have him appear, be well received 7 or 8 times, and then kill him was really a kind of a sea change. And I do want to say this fast, then I'll let you talk because I'm dominating this. I do remember about 5 issues later, there was an issue where both Cosmic Boy and Superboy are each dealing with post-traumatic guilt. And it was very impressive to me, the panels they showed on Superboy, because he started really, he felt, it's my fault he died. It's my fault. Was I really afraid of the Sun Eater? Did I deliberately let him beat me so he could do it? And he was really questioning very critically his own actions. I thought that was impressive for the time, 1967. I was impressed with that.
Yeah, I'm still early on in Superboy lore. I know even less when it comes to the Legion, really, but this really kind of piqued my interest. I was intrigued by this story. I enjoyed it. And this theme of echoes, I have a connection to this through a retelling of sorts in the mid 90s in the Final Night story, where again, the Sun Eater is a threat and you have Ferrolad take Superman's place to sacrifice himself to detonate this device in the heart of the Sun Eater. And he's only granted a last second reprieve by Parallax, Hal Jordan, who takes his place and absorbs the Sun Eater. But that was my entry point into Ferrolad and the Sun Eater and just this kind of dynamic. So again, now to go back and read the original story was really kind of fascinating. In the 90s, it was just Ferro. They didn't call him Ferrolad, but he was the disfigured son of a famous actress. I've loved Final Night, and it's really one of the first DC-wide events that I read. And so now to read the story that, was the basis for it was really cool. Well, Rich, thank you so much for taking part. It's always a pleasure when we can compare notes on these Silver Age comic book stories. Folks, right after this break, I'll be joined by new guest Bryan Dempsey, and we will talk about a selection of Silver Age comic book stories featuring Krypto. We'll be right back. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures.
Are you a die-hard Marvel zombie who compulsively rewatches every movie and TV show you can get your hands on from the House of Ideas?
Or are you a new or lapsed Marvel fan looking for an excuse to finally catch up on what your buddies have been going on and on and on about for as long as you've known them?
Then folks, do we have the show for you.
Head over to the Pop Break Today podcast feed on all your favorite platforms to check out myself, Bill Bodkin, and my co-host, Alex Marcus, on Bill vs. the MCU, where we review every single installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Along with a journey around the Marvel multiverses, where we check in on MCU-adjacent content like Netflix's The Defender Saga, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Fox's X-Men franchise, and so much more.
New episodes premiere the second Tuesday of every month on thepopbreak.com and the Pop Break Today podcast feed.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. And now, joining me to discuss Silver Age Superboy stories featuring Krypto and the Super Pets is longtime listener and first-time guest, Bryan Dempsey. Welcome.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm happy to be here. And technically, I'll say I'm not quite a first-time guest because we did the Patreon exclusive little chat there, which hopefully other people took advantage of, I know, in the past for you. But
yes, we have this tier where people can be a guest. We do a special Patreon episode, and you did that quite a while ago, and we talked about your Superman fan journey. So we have podcasted together before, but your first time on digging for kryptonite proper. The reason I wanted to bring you on here now and do this segment as part of our Silver Age discussion is that Rich, Roney, and I, earlier in this episode, we went through about a dozen key Silver Age Superboy stories, but none that particularly focused on Krypto, the super dog. And of course, Krypto is such a staple of the Silver Age and of Superboy, and I felt we'd be remiss if we didn't shine a little bit of a spotlight on Krypto. In our Golden Age discussion a couple of weeks ago, we did talk about Krypto's origin story, Krypto's debut in Adventure Comics 210 in the late Golden Age. but I wanted to take a look at some Silver Age stories. And the primary volume that we're working off of is the Tales of the Super Pets trade paperback that DC put out a while back when the League of Super Pets movie came out, the animated movie, which was a lot of fun and I enjoyed. And they put out this trade paperback compiling key appearances of the Super Pets from the pre-crisis era. Let me ask you the big picture question, though, just about Krypto, the super dog, because when we talk about, Silver Age generally, but then zeroing in on Superboy, there's yet another layer here with Krypto, the super dog, and talking about just kind of the silliness, the believability of all of this. I guess, how do you feel about this aspect of the mythology, Krypto, the super dog?
I was exposed to him as a child. I absolutely love Krypto. I have loved Krypto from the beginning, and honestly, it's really, really hard to find any images of Superboy where Krypto isn't present in the image. But yeah, no, Krypto, I think Krypto brought a lot to Superboy because it was probably the first time that Clark/Superboy didn't feel alone. He had somebody else around with the powers. They gave, they didn't make Krypto a traditional dog necessarily, although we'll get into that because he was genius level, right? So he's a genius level dog, but I don't know if that's genius level human or genius compared to the baseline of a dog. And sometimes it seems to be more genius dog, but it gave him this companionship and somebody he was talking to and interacting with. Some of the stories that really pop up is Superboy hiding Krypto as we get into. So yeah, it really did bring a lot to the story. And then as a dog lover myself, I just absolutely fell in love with Krypto, and I don't have a memory of really liking Superboy without Krypto, again, because those Filmation cartoons, I'm sure you'll get to them at some point.
Yeah, so I have now actually watched a bunch of them, and
oh, nice.
Yeah, it's Superboy and Krypto, episode in, episode out. They're hand in hand. So I'll say for myself, not surprisingly, right, that my first exposure to just even the idea of Krypto was after the death of Superman during Funeral for a Friend, where Bibbo rescues that puppy litter and adopts one of them, and a little white dog, and names him Krypto. And I believe that dog ends up in the care of Connor Kent down the line as well in that series, if I'm not mistaken. Then we get into the Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly era of the Superman books that I love and that we've talked about a lot. And there's that Silver Age version of Krypton that exists in the Phantom Zone, and the dog from that version of Krypton comes back to Earth. And so we have a super dog in the comics for the first time in a very long time. It's still not the quote unquote one true Krypto, but it's a super powered Krypto from a Krypton. And, you see the dog wreaking havoc in the Kent home, and Lois's frustration with that and their married life and whatnot. And then post Infinite Crisis, during the Jeff Johns era, you have the return of the one true Krypto, and you see the moment play out specifically in Superman's Secret Origin. Although they really hold back a lot. It's more that you just kind of see Superboy's reaction. Something lands, and then you just kind of see his reaction. I think you hear barking. I think that's kind of the way it's presented.
Yeah, there's a little arf in the very corner of the page. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say that for the reasons you've cited, what it kind of opens up for the character, the fact that he's not alone, and this is a time before Supergirl and before the rest of the relationships that he'll build throughout the DC universe. So to have that connection point, someone else that's different and powered the way he is, but also this connection to his home world, there's something really powerful about that. And then I think just at a very basic, fundamental human level, a boy and his dog, there's something very endearing and appealing about that. And I'll say, finally, for myself, we didn't grow up with pets. We got cats when I was in college, so really did not grow up with pets. But over the past decade plus, I've spent a lot of time with my mother-in-law's dog and my sister-in-law's dog. And I would say that I've definitely become a dog person, or at least more of a dog person. And I can, in a way that I really couldn't as a kid, but now as an adult, I really can appreciate that bond and that loyalty, that relationship. So yeah, I guess it's a bit silly. Although, counterpoint, the notion that Jor-El would test the rocket on on Krypto before sending his son. I guess the other bit when we talk about the credibility of this is the fact that they have human or earthly pets on Krypton, but I don't know. I can get past that as well. Like a lot of the pre-Crisis and Silver Age specifically mythology, I think for me there's a line where, okay, I can go along with this, I can buy into it, and then a line where I feel, okay, maybe this is a little bit too much and it worked for the time, but I wouldn't necessarily need to see this represented today. And I think for me the line is I don't like Krypto or any of the other super pets, their thought bubbles, their telepathic communication. And I realize, especially in a couple of the stories that we're going to look at, I don't think you could tell those specific stories unless you had that device. So I get it, but that's where it's really pushing it for me. And then hand in hand with that, one of the first stories we'll talk about, but the super monkey from Krypton. Again, totally fine with Krypto, but now we add the layer of a monkey that was a stowaway on the rocket and escapes and has it's just, that's where it's pushing it for me. So that's for me where I found the line to be.
Yeah, I agree. And, it would work like when you do a movie like the League of Super Pets that came out. It makes sense to have the thought bubbles, just like if you're reading a Garfield comic strip, right? Garfield has thought bubbles. And so, putting that into a comic strip makes sense, but interacting them or if they worked independently, like when the super pets are by themselves, there's a whole nother dynamic compared to when you have them in and around the rest of the Legion of Superheroes, basically.
Yeah, well, that's a great point because, again, I really did enjoy that League of Super Pets movie. And, of course, they're communicating with each other. Their human owners can't understand them, but they can communicate with each other, and that's fine. And I think it works in that context. But in any event, in addition to the 4 from this trade paperback that we pulled out that were Superboy-centric, there was another story you suggested, Adventure Comics 214 from 1955. So technically, we're still in the golden age with this story. It's really getting to the tail end of the golden age. But I appreciate you suggesting this. I did read it, and this is just a few issues after Krypto's debut. And we talked in that Golden Age episode. Tyler and I were like, "What? He just leaves at the end of this first issue?" We knew he comes back, but we were surprised how quickly he departed initially. But this shows his return, and I thank you for suggesting this because I thought this one was hilarious. This was sitcom level setup here, where just to kind of lay it out for the audience. Krypto comes back, and of course, Clark is very happy to have his companion. But Lana gets suspicious when she sees this super dog, and so to throw her off, he goes to the animal shelter and picks out a dog that looks just like Krypto, but that, of course, is a normal dog that he plans to use to throw off Lana's suspicion. But Krypto sees all of this with his telescopic vision and thinks that Superboy doesn't want him, so he leaves. And then, of course, Superboy shows up at this doghouse that he had built for Krypto outside of town with the replacement normal dog. Krypto's not there, so he leaves the replacement dog there. Meanwhile, these crooks have found all of these clues indicating that there's a super dog out there, and they want to nab the super dog and use it to pull off this heist. So they show up and find what they think is the super dog, but of course, it's just this normal, regular dog that Superboy placed there that he's planning to use to trick Lana. And they take this dog, and Superboy realizes this, but he doesn't want to nab them right away because he doesn't know what these guys are up to. He wants to follow them and let this play out and catch them in the act, because at this point, all he can get them on is dog napping. And then this is where it gets so wacky, where these crooks are training this or trying to train this dog to pull off this heist, but they are expecting this dog to have superpowers. So Superboy, off in the wings there in secret, is using his powers to create the illusion that the dog has powers. I thought this was hilarious.
It is straight up a sitcom situation. And as I was reading that and hadn't read that, I'd read it before, which is why I suggested I hadn't read it in a long time. And what I found, okay, well, I'm about to talk to Anthony about it. What am I seeing in this? And I'm like, because it's a sitcom. It is flat out, the trope, just starting with Lana Lang. So, if you think about it, think about all these TV shows, whether, Bewitched, The Nosy Neighbor, and I Dream of Jeannie, the captain's wife, always trying to figure out what's going on. Anytime you have a story where the main characters are trying to keep a secret, all the way up to like Small Wonder. If anybody remembers this show from the early '90s, little Harriet was always trying to catch the family doing stuff. You always have that. So if you have the character doing something extraordinary, you have a nosy neighbor trying to catch them, which is what they really relegated Lana to. You know, we all talk about, hey, Lana and Lois in the Silver Age are basically just trying to prove that Clark's Superman, right? This is what they've been doing, but it's also just a traditional character trope for a neighbor. So honestly, it's Lana who shows up and is like, well, boy, that dog bit that bone really hard. That must be a super dog. And just basically just started the whole thing rolling. It's the coincidences that occur, the leaps in logic that they make, that the crooks make when they, I find this old cannonball, iron cannonball. It's got teeth marks in it. Oh, it must have been a super dog. It wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't malformed in its creation, or maybe used at some point in time, 100 years ago, perhaps. No, it's totally been bitten by a dog, and they just it's laughable. I also really liked, when Lana and Clark are first exchanging her suspicions. It really hit me was just how often, much like especially Silver Age Batman, everything was super in front of it. He's a super smart, super dog taking super bites. Like it was just, yeah, it's you can tell it's written for children, but I can take it with that eye of both being humorous from this perspective, but also what they're trying to do with character tropes that they're using.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I found it humorous, but it wasn't that, oh, I'm just laughing at this silly story. They created a genuinely humorous setup. So that one was a lot of fun. I appreciate you suggesting that. Now, as we move into this Tales of the Super Pets trade, there are a bunch of stories collected here, but there were 4, again, that were actually Superboy stories or featured Superboy. Yep. So the first one we looked at was the Super Monkey from Krypton. So no Krypto in this one, but we do have the Super Monkey, who will later come to be known as Beppo. And this is from Superboy number 76 in December 1958. This, again, when we talk about this line, the Super Monkey is really pushing it for me. I guess I've had this awareness of Beppo the Super Monkey, but never really had much exposure. I know there have been modern stories that have kind of toyed with the character or concept here and there, little Easter egg type things, I believe, but this is not a character that really has ever occupied any thought space for me. Did I even make the connection that Chrissy Beppo on Superman and Lois, shares the name? Maybe. I don't even know. I don't know that I've ever really given it much thought, but what's your take on Beppo the Super Monkey?
Well, I was actually surprised when I read this that doesn't have the name Beppo.
Yeah, he's just Super Monkey. Just Super Monkey.
There is a Beppo in the issue.
Yep.
Which was interesting. Just an organ grinder walking down the streets of Smallville with his monkey Beppo. I found the story actually kind of interesting as far as less probably from the story function. Again, if you ever watch an episode of Leave It to Beaver, right? You got the child who's not doing anything, but they're being accused of doing something wrong. Another sitcom style story where the monkey happens to be wearing red and blue, so he looks like super baby. I guess at this point is what they're
super baby. Yeah. Can we also talk about the fact that there are many layers to the flashbacks here, because we have Clark at the zoo, at the Smallville Zoo. Again, I always remark this little town. It's got a museum, zoo, an orphanage. There's so much going on here. But he's at the zoo with his parents, and he reminisces about the time he overtook light rays to view the past, to view this early childhood encounter with Beppo the Super Monkey. So he's remembering the time he remembered this thing that happened when he was a kid. Awesome. And we see these events unfold where he views the arrival of his rocket on Earth, and this monkey bursting out that had stowed away on the rocket ship and went off and had all of these adventures in the animal kingdom. Of course, the monkey has powers just as Kal-El does on Earth, and then eventually uses his supervision and sees Super Baby and goes off to play with him. And then, yes, you have this kind of comedy of errors where the monkey dressed like Super Baby is causing all of this mischief that the Kents blame on Super Baby, right? So Jonathan Kent is going to take a bath and the monkey's in there and he super speeds away and he thinks it's Clark. There are coins in the cookie jar that Super Monkey gives to Beppo, the monkey, because he's, he mimics what he sees others do, but then Ma thinks that Super Baby was responsible for that as well. That later leads to the scene you were talking about where Super Baby lights Pa's cigar, and then the monkey, again, mimicking, lights what he thinks is also a cigar, but is actually fireworks that Jonathan has brought, and the fireworks start to go off, and Super Monkey loses it and flies off, and of course, he'll later come back, but that's what kind of drives him from Earth the first time. So, I don't know, man. I don't know what kind of analysis could be offered about this. I feel like it kind of is what it is.
I'll say this. So some of the stuff I noticed. So, for example, even though they're doing it for humorous sake. So there's the scene where little Super Baby is playing with his fire truck, right? And Beppo goes and pulls it in there, and they're pulling the fire truck. And at first, literally my brain was like, well, they're exaggerating because it's a fire truck and it would break. And I was like, wait a second. Back then, the fire truck was totally die-cast metal. Metal under the right conditions would actually stretch. We're used to plastic fire trucks. I guarantee your son is playing with a plastic fire truck.
Yes.
In your house, So I was like, well, at least it's accurate when he's playing with the trumpet. It's probably a little brass trumpet, again, a malleable metal that would expand. So at least I was appreciating that we could kind of accept the physics of it, everything except for the fact that Pa would not notice a fully haired, brightly dressed anybody in the bathtub before he sat down. And of course, the issue ends with the hint that there's still another story to be told before the current Adventure Superman as a boy, remembering as a baby.
I have to say, because we've talked about the retellings of the origin many times on the show, I'm glad that the Super Monkey did not become a thing where you see this popping up in different tellings. I think it barely had its place in this, and thankfully that's where it stayed. So we also have the Legion of Super-Traitors from Adventure Comics number 293 in 1962 by Jerry Siegel and Kurt Swan. And I thought this was a cool one. You have Superboy behaving oddly. He's about to rescue a plane and then he decides to wreck it instead, but thankfully Krypto is there to save the day. And then Superboy kind of snaps out of it, but then he starts to lose it again. He grabs Krypto by the tail and is gonna hurl him off planet. But then again, he comes out of it. There's an interesting bit where Clark is talking to his parents and then he's asleep at night, and Jonathan and Martha are standing there and they refer to him as Superboy. They suspected, I wonder if Superboy was exposed to red kryptonite or something from another planet. And I was just so struck. We've talked about how the Kents, even though they're here, right? They're in play, they're alive at this point in time, and so they're present in these stories. They don't yet occupy that role that they will in later stories and later adaptations and whatnot. And even just the fact that they refer to him as Superboy, I found so striking. And I think here is yet another example where they're there and he tells them what's going on, but it's not that they're really able to offer anything. Not that I would expect them to offer physical help per se, but just in terms of advice, of comfort, it's very minimal, which again, I know is in keeping with this, but I just continue to be struck by it.
It's interesting because they're really taking on the role of foster parents. That's really what they've been relegated to. I don't remember if this issue or I made a note of it, at least mentally, and I don't know where he calls him like Dad Kent. He doesn't just call him Dad. He doesn't call him Pa. He calls him Dad Kent. Like, he is definitely a child who remembers a life before living with these people, and he doesn't necessarily refer to them as his parents, and it's like they don't quite have that familial bond. Like they're just fostering him, doing the best they can to make sure this kid's okay.
Yeah, and Tyler brought this up last week, and this will come up again next week as well. But the fact that even though they have adopted him, they are continually referred to as his foster parents, and there's a difference between adoption and fostering. So it is very interesting. So he's then summoned to the desert by the time-traveling Legion of Superheroes. They have this device that allows them to see into the Phantom Zone, and we get a little bit of a tour here. We see Jax-Ur, we see Zod, we see Mon-El, poor Mon-El. The Legion attacks. They use kryptonite. They try to get the jump, or in fact, they do get the jump on Superboy. And what we'll learn has happened is that there are these, what do they call them? Brain globes from another planet.
Yep.
And they want to steal the Earth, essentially. And initially they were using their mind powers to try to control Superboy. And that's why he had those episodes earlier on where he lost it. But I guess his will was too strong, so they went after the Legion instead. A couple of things here. So when the Legion bombard Superboy with the kryptonite and he's down on the ground, he summons his robots. Now, again, not unlike Krypto, in the other Silver Age stories we've talked about so far, I don't know that we really had much, if any, business with the robots, but another staple of Silver Age stories, and yet another instance where, whether we're talking Superman or Superboy, but really when we're talking Superboy, I really have to just let it go, because that's where, again, I feel like, okay, now we're really pushing the believability of this. But there they are, the robots.
Yeah, he's got robots, but he doesn't have the fortress yet.
Right.
Because Silver Age staple, he doesn't get a fortress till or at least they never really reference it except for in the adult side of things. So he's keeping all these things all around Smallville, which at this point, Smallville's basically New York with no skyscrapers.
Essentially. But they make very short work of the robots. But then thankfully, and again, this is that's why this story is in the book here, Krypto to the rescue. And what all of us, the villains and the Legion, and we, the reader, come to realize is that these brain globes, their mind control powers don't work on animals. So Krypto's able to fight back, and then the Legion, now free of their control, they travel through time and they round up Streaky, the Super Cat, and Super Horse and Super Monkey, forming this Legion of Super Pets by the end of the story. And they're able to fight back and drive these brain globes away from the Earth. So, I mean, here it's not just Krypto. Now we're pulling in all these, all the Super Pets, all the animals. Out of the ones we looked at, other than that sitcom setup that we talked about, I like this one the best out of these stories because, for purposes of this episode in particular, this one was, I think, a really cool cross-section of it's a Silver Age Superboy story featuring the Legion and Krypto and the Super Pet. So it really kind of hits on a lot of those angles there. But it is set in and around Smallville, so it really kind of has a lot of these aspects all kind of swirling around. So, while not perhaps the most compelling story, I thought it was solid, and especially in the realm of Super Pets, I thought this was a strong one.
It is. You can tell when you're reading something Jerry Siegel. He really was a good writer. His contributions really aren't talked about enough in the Silver Age. So,
no, very fair. So we have two more stories here. I'll be honest, I didn't get a ton of mileage out of these remaining two stories. Curious to get your take.
The hazing one.
Yeah. So there's the super tests of the Super Pets from Adventure Comics 322 in 1964 by Edmund Hamilton and John Forte, where Prody II, right, this protoplasmic pet of Chameleon Boy, wants to join the Legion of Super Pets, and they put him through this whole battery of tests that in the end he passes, but it's quite the gauntlet that he has to go through. And then the Revolt of the Super Pets from Adventure Comics 364 in 1968 by Jim Shooter and Pete Costanza, where there's a rift between the Legion of Superheroes and the Legion of Super Pets. The pets feel unappreciated. I guess not unlike the League of Super Pets movie a little bit as well. That kind of dynamic, that friction, that divide, they feel like they're not appreciated or they're not wanted, and they're welcomed on this other planet where they're hailed and their statues in their honor. But some of the leaders on that planet are actually behind the crime robots that have been plaguing the galaxy. So this was all a bit of a ruse. But yeah, I don't know. What was your takeaway from those couple of stories?
Okay. So we'll go back to Adventure 322, where I mentioned they're hazing, right? So Prody 2 wants to join Legion of Super-Pets. They're like, well, see if you qualify. We're gonna have you jump through these hoops. We're gonna see if you can go capture this thing. You can do that. There are a couple of things I took away from it. Number one was I genuinely felt bad for Prody 2 because apparently Chameleon Boy's original Prody perished. Something happened to Prody. He has replaced Prody with somebody else, gave him the exact same name. So he has no identity of his own or their own, or who knows what if there's a gender associated to a protoplasmic entity. So yeah, Prody just has no identity to speak of, and just wants to be part of this group, and they're just putting Prody through the paces. And I kind of felt for Prody, to be honest. Like I was like, wow, why are they, But I also appreciated, again, was it Hamilton? It was Edwin Hamilton, as the writer. He took the time to narratively explain, when Prody changes shape, because Prody was changing shapes from, any number of sizes, and it changes the mass. And he actually made a point of saying that, when they change shape, they take atoms from the air. And he took the time to explain that to kids.
If there were two things that stood out to me about this one was this is all happening against the backdrop of the Legion building this device to battle the Time Trapper.
Yep.
And it just felt like these super pets, they were devising all of these tests that could have really gotten in the way. It's like, there's some serious business going on here. So there was that. And then the final test has to deal with Krypto, where Krypto says, you have to catch me. But of course, Krypto has super speed, and Prody does, but Prody can shapeshift. And so, Krypto's hiding in the water, and Prody changes into a salmon and all this. But Krypto ends up opening this underwater chest that contains kryptonite.
A chest that he sees the chest down there, and he goes, oh, a friend of Superboy must have collected all this. The leaps in logic that happen in all of these comics.
I know, but then Prody gets the opportunity to save him, and puts like sea sludge on Krypto and disguises himself as Krypto. So when they show up back at the headquarters, it looks like Krypto holding Prody, but it's actually the reverse of that. So a little clever reveal there. But yeah, I know they really put this poor little protoplasm being through his paces.
And I don't think it was designed for Prody to win. Like Krypto knew, well, if you can't catch me, then you don't deserve to be in there, because he full well, like, I have super speed. There's no way you're gonna. It's not like he's playing hide and go seek where he's gonna hide in one location until you find him. Nope, he just keeps on going when Prody does catch up. So it was like I said, the only way I could describe that entire story is that was hazing. They were hazing the new guy.
Yeah, I'll say for myself, well, especially when we talk about Krypto, the Krypto of it all. The sweet spot for me really is Superboy and Krypto in Smallville. Not so much these Legion of Super Pets stories in the present or the future, but especially in the future. It just is not particularly my cup of tea. But the more earthbound Superboy Krypto stories, I do find very endearing. And like I said, more so now than I ever did before. So yeah, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about Krypto and some of these stories in this era, because it was such a big part of it. Is there anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
They just go hand in hand so much. I can't picture Superboy without Krypto. Heck, just the name Krypto inspired me. I was so excited when that episode of Smallville popped up.
Yes.
And was that season 4?
Yeah.
So I was completely enamored, and maybe this is why I'm a dog guy.
Bryan, thank you so much for taking part in this. It was really a pleasure. My thanks to all three guests who participated in this episode: Dan Greenfield, Rich Roney, and Bryan Dempsey. Audience, I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week and every week thereafter as a Superboy fan journey continues to unfold. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.